My name is Janet Cole, and I have always believed that the places we grow up shape us more deeply than we ever realize. I was raised in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood in Rosebridge, Colorado, in a large white house with green shutters and a wraparound porch that creaked whenever the wind touched it. That house held my memories, my fears, my joys, and every version of myself that existed before I understood what betrayal really meant. People always assume that a beautiful home contains a beautiful life, but that isn't always how the world works. My parents, Martin and Eleanor Cole, were respected business owners, the proud founders of Tech Manufacturing, one of the earliest and strongest manufacturing firms in our state. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. From the inside, I was the only one who believed in loyalty. Growing up, I was taught that success must be earned, not given. That was the one lesson I truly took from my parents. For years, I watched them run the company with cold calculation, always reaching for the next profit, the next contract, the next approval. I didn't understand then that they viewed their own children through that same lens, valuable only when useful, forgettable when not. Still, I adored them the way a daughter is supposed to. When I was finally old enough, I stepped into the company with a heart full of hope and a mind ready to work harder than anyone else. At 24, I believed that my loyalty would eventually be enough for them to see me as worthy. Over the next 10 years, I became the backbone of Tech. I arrived before sunrise and left long after the building was dark. I studied every failing contract, learned every broken system, and took every neglected department and raised it back to life. I rebuilt the company's ties with businesses across America and even created new partnerships in Europe that my parents never thought were possible. Slowly, the numbers rose. Slowly, the reputation grew stronger. And slowly, Tech transformed from a struggling, outdated machine into a flourishing enterprise worth $75 million. I did not complain. I did not boast. I simply worked. I believed that the day would come when my parents would finally look at me not as a child, but as the woman who had saved their legacy. I wish I had known that they had never intended to see me that way. The truth came crashing into my life on what was supposed to be my promotion day, my moment of recognition, the one day I allowed myself to feel proud of everything I had given up. The event was held in a grand hall in Hartford City, a place filled with glittering chandeliers, polished floors, and the laughter of people who thought they understood success. I remember wearing a simple navy blue dress because I believed professionalism mattered more than appearance. I remember the faint hum of music and the clinking of glasses. And I remember standing there surrounded by colleagues who were smiling at me, telling me I deserved this moment. Then my father stood up. He held a glass of champagne, the golden liquid catching the light as he tapped it with a spoon to quiet the room. Everyone turned. I felt my heart flutter with anticipation, my cheeks warming as I prepared myself for the words I had waited a decade to hear. But instead, I heard something that shattered everything inside me. "Janet," he said loudly, proudly, as if delivering good news, "step aside. Your brother can do a better job than you. We don't need you." For a second, the room didn't make sense. I felt like the world blurred around me, as if someone had suddenly removed all the oxygen. My brother, Daniel Cole, had spent most of his life traveling across Europe with wealthy friends, hopping between London, Paris, and Berlin, never once asking about the company or showing interest in anything beyond his next expensive adventure. He spent thousands of dollars a week without thinking. He had never worked a full day in his life. Yet here my father stood, telling the world that Daniel, not me, was the key to the company's future. My mother was smiling beside him. Not a small smile, a wide, proud grin, as if the words made perfect sense. I felt my chest tighten with a slow, painful burn. I forced myself to smile, even though the edges of my vision were trembling. My colleagues looked confused. Some stared at me with pity. A few looked away, unable to watch the humiliation unfolding in the middle of the celebration that was meant to honor me. I stayed silent because silence was the only thing keeping me from breaking. After what felt like a lifetime, I pushed my chair back and stood. The room grew quieter as I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Every step felt heavy, like I was walking away from the last 10 years of my existence. Before reaching the door, something inside me, something strong, something tired, forced me to look back. My parents were still laughing, whispering to each other, caught in their own world of false pride. So I lifted my chin, steadied my voice, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You will regret this day." For a moment, no one moved. Then my parents laughed again. But this time, their laughter didn't reach me. It didn't drown me. It didn't belong to my world anymore. Because I wasn't joking. I walked out of the hall feeling the cold night air hit my face like a slap of reality. The city lights of Hartford City sparkled like they were mocking me, but strangely, the streets felt clearer than they ever had before. I had lost everything that night. The recognition I earned, the respect I deserved, and the family I thought I could trust. But as I stood there, breathing in the crisp American air, I also realized something powerful. What they had taken from me, I could rebuild. What they had destroyed, I could recreate. And what they had done to me, I would never forget. That night, everything changed. And nothing would ever be the same again. When I stepped out of that grand hall in Hartford City on the night of my humiliation, I thought the world had ended. The air felt too thick to breathe, and the weight of 10 years pressed hard against my chest. I drove through the quiet American roads until I reached my small rented apartment in Willow Heights, Virginia, a place I had chosen long before because it offered peace instead of luxury. It was a modest brick building surrounded by maple trees, with white-painted balconies and a soft hum of life that didn't demand anything from me. For the first time in years, I felt small, but I also felt free. That night, I sat on the floor of my narrow living room with the lights turned off. My navy blue dress pulled around me like a shadow I couldn't escape. I cried, not loudly, not wildly, but in a way that made my whole body shake. I cried for the hours I had sacrificed, for the years I had devoted, for the woman I had forced myself to become. I cried because everything I believed in, family, loyalty, honor, had turned into dust in a single sentence spoken by my father. But grief doesn't last forever. And the kind of pain I carried that night had a strange way of sharpening into clarity. The following morning, I woke up with my eyes swollen but my mind strangely clear. The soft sunlight filtered through the white curtains of my small bedroom, and for once, I didn't rush to check emails, prepare reports, or schedule meetings. I sat at my tiny kitchen table with a cup of cheap coffee and breathed in the silence. It felt strange not to be needed. It felt stranger to realize I had never really been valued. I spent the first 2 days resting, sleeping more than I had in years. Then, slowly, my thoughts started forming patterns, threads of logic woven through the chaos of betrayal. I began to remember every contract I had signed, every partnership I had built, every product I had personally designed. I remembered how often my parents had dismissed my changes, only to later praise the results as if they had envisioned them themselves. I remembered the long nights spent fixing their mistakes and the early mornings spent preparing for meetings they couldn't handle. And then one thought hit me so clearly that it made my breath catch. Everything the company relied on traced back to me. Not to my father. Not to my mother. Me. Coltech didn't own my mind, my work, or my partnerships. My name was on the deals because I had earned the trust behind them. The suppliers I brought from America and Europe didn't care about the Cole family. They cared about the woman who had shown them respect, loyalty, and intelligence. So I opened my laptop and started reading through every contract that had ever required my signature. One by one, I saw it with unmistakable clarity. The rights, the approvals, the relationships, they belonged to Janet Cole, not Coltech Manufacturing. For a decade, my parents had taken advantage of my dedication without realizing that the foundation they stood on had been entirely built with my hands. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't wake up thinking about destruction. I simply made a decision to protect what was mine. The first week, I contacted the distributors I brought into the company. Men and women from cities like Yorkshire Bay, Delaware, Riverson, Ohio, and partners overseas in Europe who respected me as a businesswoman. I wrote to them personally, explaining that I was stepping away from coal tech and that my involvement in the deals was ending. To my surprise, almost every one of them responded with the same message. If you're not part of it, we're out. The second week, I met with the legal team I had trusted for years, people outside the company who had helped me negotiate contracts. They confirmed what I already suspected. I had every right to withdraw my name from the agreements I had created. My parents had never bothered to check the details. They had assumed I would always be there to save them. They had never imagined a world where I walked away. By the third week, the company's balance sheets began to tremble. I wasn't involved anymore, but I could almost hear the chaos from miles away. Emails from old colleagues began arriving in my inbox, messages filled with fear, confusion, and frustration. They told me suppliers were pulling out faster than anyone could replace them. Clients were refusing to renew their contracts. The company's reputation was collapsing like a building without support beams. But I didn't respond to any of them. During those quiet days in Willow Heights, I developed a routine. I woke early, made a cup of strong black coffee, and sat by my small window reading books about leadership, innovation, and rebuilding. I wrote ideas for my future in a simple notebook with a blue cover. I went on long walks around the neighborhood, breathing in the crisp Virginia air and letting the silence settle into me. I realized that for the first time since I was a young woman, my time belonged to me. My energy belonged to me. My dreams belonged to me. Revenge wasn't something I chased. It simply grew on its own, like a seed planted by betrayal. By the end of the fourth week, I heard through colleagues, indirectly of course, that Coltech was barely staying afloat. Their biggest partners had withdrawn their support. One major distributor from Europe had canceled a deal worth millions of dollars. Another supplier from the East Coast had announced publicly that they wouldn't work with the company without me. Investors were beginning to whisper that Coltech no longer had real leadership, that the company had made a fatal mistake. I didn't smile when I heard these things, but I didn't cry anymore either. I felt something else, something calm, steady, unshakable. Justice. Because I hadn't broken anything illegally or dishonestly. I had simply taken back what I had built with my own hands. The company had depended on me more than anyone admitted, and now they were realizing the truth. Coltech had fired the wrong person. As the month came to an end, I sat once more in my small living room, drinking a warm cup of tea instead of coffee, watching the sun sink behind the neighborhood rooftops. The sky glowed orange and gold, like a quiet promise of something new. I didn't know what the next chapter of my life would look like, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My story wasn't ending. It was finally beginning. The morning that changed everything arrived quietly, without any warning or sense of drama. It was just after 7 when my phone started buzzing on the wooden nightstand beside my bed in my small Willow Heights apartment. I was half awake, wrapped in a warm blanket, enjoying the rare peace I had gained over the past month. The sun had barely risen, casting pale light across my room. I thought it might be one of my old colleagues checking in again, or perhaps another supplier asking if I would consider returning to the industry. But when I reached for the phone and saw my mother's name, Eleanor Cole, glowing across the screen, my heart went still. Her voice trembled from the moment she spoke. "Janet, the company is breaking. All the contracts are canceled. Our main clients just left. What is happening?" There was fear in her tone, real fear, the kind I had never heard from her in my entire life. This was the woman who had always stood tall, always looked down on others, always believed she was untouchable. But now, she sounded like someone who had lost her footing completely. For a moment, I felt something stir inside me, not sympathy, but a distant ache, like remembering an old wound. I held the phone to my ear, but I didn't speak. I had no words to offer her, no comfort to give. Silence was the only thing I could give her, and it was the only thing she deserved. When I didn't answer, she began to sob softly, barely able to form the words. But I stayed silent, and after a moment, the call ended. I thought the storm had passed, but seconds later, my phone rang again, this time with my father's name, Martin Cole. His voice burst through the speaker with raw panic. "Janet, come fix this. You have to come back. We're losing millions of dollars every hour. It was strange hearing him panic, the same man who had humiliated me so publicly. He sounded desperate, terrified, drowning under the weight of his own mistakes. In the background, I could hear chaotic voices, the clatter of desks, papers being tossed around, panic spreading like wildfire inside the company. I closed my eyes, listening to him gasp for control. And again, I said nothing. His voice cracked with anger. "Janet, answer me." But I didn't. Because the truth was simple. There was nothing left for me to say to him. When I ended the call, the room fell silent again. The world outside was peaceful, calm, unaware that an empire was collapsing in real time. I set my phone down, walked into my tiny kitchen, and made myself a cup of coffee. The smell of roasted beans filled the room, grounding me. It was strange, almost surreal, that life could feel so simple while something so massive was falling apart somewhere else. For years, I had carried Coltech like a weight on my back, believing I owed my family my loyalty. But now, watching everything unfold from a distance, I felt something I hadn't expected: release. Over the next 2 days, the calls continued, first from senior managers, then from partners across America, then from old colleagues who couldn't understand why everything was falling apart so fast. They said that deals were collapsing overnight. Suppliers from cities like Lakemore, Illinois, and Port Scarlett, New York, were pulling out. Clients from Europe were withdrawing their investments, refusing to continue without me. The company's reputation was unraveling faster than anyone could contain. I read their messages, but never responded. One email from a former colleague said, "We've never seen anything like this. Coltech is imploding. They're finished if you don't come back." Another said, "The board is in chaos. Your parents have no idea what to do." I sat on my couch, sipping tea, watching the world outside my window move on as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Cars passed. People walked their dogs. Neighbors chatted. Life kept going. And Coltech kept falling. By the end of the week, I learned through the news, not through family, that Coltech Manufacturing had declared bankruptcy. A company once valued at $75 million had collapsed in less than 7 days. Reporters called it the fastest corporate fold of the year, and analysts across America debated what went wrong. Some speculated mismanagement. Others blamed poor leadership. A few wondered if internal sabotage was involved, though no one could find a single illegal action. I hadn't broken any laws. I had simply withdrawn my name, my work, my authority, the very things that kept the company alive. Comments flooded news sites. People were shocked that such a long-standing family business could crumble so quickly. Investors from Europe refused to speak with Coltech anymore, saying their trust had been tied to one person, me. It was a strange feeling, knowing that a decade of my hard work was being acknowledged only now, when the company was already dust. On the 7th day, as if the universe had arranged the timing perfectly, my phone rang again. This time, both my parents were on speaker. Their voices no longer sounded powerful or certain. They sounded small, broken, defeated. "Janet," my mother whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Please help us." I closed my eyes. For a moment, I remembered the little girl who once wanted to make her parents proud, who dreamed of their approval, who worked herself to exhaustion, hoping they would see her worth. But that girl no longer existed. She had been buried the night they laughed at her pain. "I'm begging you," my father added, and the desperation in his voice felt unreal. This was the man who once acted like he controlled the world. Now he sounded like someone standing on the last edge of hope. I let the silence hang for a few seconds before finally speaking. "This is revenge," I said softly, my voice steady. "You fired the woman who built your future. Now you can live in the ruins you created." There was a long pause on the other end. Then my mother broke into tears. My father said nothing. I hung up. And in that moment, after 10 years of burying myself under their expectations and demands, I finally felt myself breathe again, deeply, freely, completely. The empire they destroyed was theirs. The life I was about to build was mine. When Coltech finally collapsed into bankruptcy, I felt no thrill of victory, no triumphant rush of revenge. Instead, I felt an unfamiliar quiet inside my chest, like a heavy door had closed and sealed off the last 10 years of my life. For days, I stayed in my Willow Heights apartment, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the leaves shift in the autumn wind. The world outside moved forward without hesitation. People cared about their errands, their jobs, their small joys, completely unaware that somewhere in America a family empire had turned to dust. It made me realize something important. Life does not pause for anyone, not for heartbreak, not for betrayal, and certainly not for revenge. That realization pushed me to make the biggest decision of my life. I needed a fresh start, far away from the memories that clung to every corner of Virginia. So I packed my belongings, my laptop, my notebooks, my clothes, and the art pieces I bought long ago, but never had time to appreciate. I put them in the back of my dark gray SUV, locked the apartment door one last time, and drove north through long stretches of American highways. The journey felt cleansing, like passing through invisible gates. Every mile carried me farther from the version of myself who had lived for the approval of people who never deserved her loyalty. I arrived in Silverwood, Maine, on a crisp morning. The sky was a soft silver blue, and the ocean air brushed against my skin like forgiveness. Silverwood wasn't a crowded city or a loud town. It was peaceful, quiet, honest. Waves crashed gently against the shore, gulls drifted above the water, and the breeze carried the faint scent of pine mixed with salt. It was the kind of place where you could breathe without pressure, think without noise, and rebuild without the weight of ghosts. I purchased a home on the outskirts of the town, a modern coastal house priced at $850,000. It was painted a gentle cream color, with tall windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, letting the sunrise pour into every room. The living room opened toward the ocean, and from the balcony, I could see the water shimmer like liquid glass. The house felt warm, open, and mine. Truly mine. There were no traces of my parents, no shadows of Coltech, no echoes of old expectations. Just a blank slate and a future waiting to be written. The first week in Silverwood, I let myself rest. I walked along the beach barefoot, letting the cold waves touch my feet. I explored the local cafes, where friendly voices greeted me without knowing my history or my family name. I watched the sunset like it was a story unfolding across the sky. For the first time, I allowed myself to simply be Janet, not the daughter of Martin and Eleanor, not the backbone of a company, not the victim of betrayal. Just a woman with a future she hadn't even begun to shape. But rest soon turned into purpose. My mind, trained for years to think strategically, began forming ideas in the quiet hours of dawn. I realized that the world of manufacturing and technology was changing rapidly, and sustainability was becoming the center of attention in both America and Europe. I had spent years studying new materials, renewable systems, and efficient production practices, knowledge that Coltech had often ignored because it didn't match their old-fashioned vision. So, I formed an idea, and that idea became a plan. I founded my own company, Janet Innovations, right from my new home office overlooking the ocean. I registered the business under my name, not my family's, and invested the savings I had worked so hard to earn. I focused the company on clean technology and sustainable manufacturing solutions, designing systems that reduced waste and energy consumption without sacrificing performance. It was the future Coltech never cared about, and now it was mine to build. Within weeks, messages flowed into my business inbox. Former investors who had worked with me before contacted me from cities across America: Northcrest, Michigan, Harborview, Florida, Ashford Peak, Nevada, each one expressing interest in supporting my new venture. Partners from Europe reached out as well, telling me they trusted my leadership more than any company name. It felt surreal at first, but also incredibly validating. They had never believed in Coltech, they had believed in me. Within 6 months, Janet Innovations grew to $12 million, a number that once seemed unimaginable when I was trapped inside my parents' company. The success wasn't just financial, it was personal. I built a team of talented people who joined me because they believed in my vision, not my family's legacy. I hired Grace, a strategic planner from Vermont, Helen, a brilliant engineer from Ohio, Oliver, a marketing expert from Pennsylvania, Patrick, a financial analyst with a sharp mind, Lydia, a sustainability researcher with fresh ideas, and Marcus, a designer whose creativity added soul to every project. Each one brought something new, something bright, something genuine. And I treated them the way I had wished to be treated, fairly, respectfully, sincerely. I made sure no one felt invisible or undervalued. I remembered the pain of being dismissed, the sting of being underestimated, and I vowed never to become the kind of leader who could crush someone's spirit. One evening, after a long day of reviewing new proposals, I stepped out onto my balcony. The sky was painted in shades of gold and rose, reflecting across the calm ocean. The waves whispered like they were carrying secrets, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not because everything had gone perfectly, but because I had finally stepped into the woman I was always meant to be. My parents had tried to diminish me. They had tried to replace me. They had tried to erase me. But all they did was set me free. As I leaned against the balcony railing, listening to the soft music of the sea, I realized the truth with a clarity that filled my entire being. My life didn't end when they fired me. It started. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is not destruction. It's becoming everything they never imagined you could be. I am Janet. And I built my world from the ashes they left behind.